Your world, your challenges, your faith. When faith within engages the world without, there's power. It's living life from the inside out.
Most years we'd be spending December running to concerts and parties and helping with church programs. COVID-19's changed that. This could be the most solitary December of our lives. But we're not the only or the first Christian believers to walk through December in a reserved way, in a contemplative way. For centuries, Christians have actually made the choice to spend the bulk of December rather quietly. We're going to talk about that today on the Inside Out podcast and figure out what we might learn from our 2020 walk toward December 25th. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and my guest is blogger and author Michelle Van Loon. Her many books include Becoming Sage, Moments and Days, and Born to Wander. Welcome back, Michelle.
I am so glad to be with you, and happy Advent, if there is such a thing.
That's right. Our greeting, as unusual as that might be. Now, Michelle, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why Christians around the world today and through the ages choose to spend December in a more subdued way. But before that, can you tell us a little bit about your story? Why you spent your first Christmases in a more devotional way and what you learned from those years?
I would be happy to. And devotional, at the time that I was a teenager, I wasn't thinking devotional. I was thinking of all the things that I was missing, that all the other Christians I knew around me were enjoying. I grew up, both of my parents are Jewish, and I came to faith through a long and patient witness from a friend that I went to school with. And I knew it was not going to go well when I told my parents that I believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And it did not. It went as bad and as painfully as you can imagine. Now, my parents weren't super observant, but Jewish people have 2,000 years worth of terrible history of persecution done in the name of Christ. That continues now. Anti-Semitism is on the rise now here in the U.S. and in Europe. So this is a continuing story. But the Jesus that I encountered in the Bible and in my friends was not line them up and send them to the gas chambers Jesus, because that isn't Jesus. That's the enemy of our souls. But my parents' response was, well, as long as you're under our roof, you cannot attend church or do any Christian things. I believe that they hoped that they would kind of starve out my faith and they could just wait it out and it would be a fad, like a hula hoop or something. Well, I'm now 61 years old and that didn't work. But meanwhile, especially in December, and especially as an undiscipled and young Christian, I believed that all of the Christmas stuff that I was seeing around me, the trees and the cantatas and the candlelight services and Santa, mix it all in, you know, whether it's secular Christmas or faith-oriented observance, I couldn't participate in any of it. So my Christmases, those first years that I was a believer, were, I sat in my room, I listened to the Christian radio station in my city. I lived in Chicago. I read my Bible, and I kind of felt sorry for myself, but I also experienced a nearness of God and a clarity about what this day was about. That when I was free, as I moved into adulthood and got married and formed my own family, and I was free to do a tree and put up lights and go to all the services my heart desired, I realized pretty quickly that all the rest of that diluted what I had grown to understand. So I'm very grateful for that kind of discipleship school of maybe call it a little bit of mild persecution, at least a lack of freedom, because it's shaped the way that I've approached Christmas throughout my life. And it definitely feels like I've got something in the tank for this particular Christmas.
Well, that's a great way to segue to my question about what's in that tank and what can you share with us. Some churches follow the church calendar and the church seasons, and these weeks before Christmas, when you look at it through the church seasons, they fall into the season of Advent. So what do you think our COVID-19 December has in common with Advent? Can you say a little bit about what Advent is? And how do you think we can invest Christmas with richer meaning because of what we might learn in these weeks? Instead of thinking of it as what we don't have, but in these weeks before Christmas, what can we be actually taking advantage of because of what our COVID world is like?
Long, long ago, we're talking in the early centuries of the church, Advent was kind of inserted after Christmas was inserted into the Christian calendar. And that came 5th to 8th century, depending on where you're kind of marking your time. Advent was built in after that to help people prepare for Christmas, because Christmas was one of the times when new believers were welcomed into the church through baptism. So Christmas wasn't everything that we've piled on. You know, depending on where our family came from, the Christmas trees came from Germany and carols came from France and different places in Europe. There's a lot that has been added on that feels like it's just as embedded in the holiday, the holy day, as the observance of the incarnation itself.
Right.
Advent has been meant through time to be a time of preparation, and kind of like how Lent is, where there's fasting and there's focus and prayer and charity that belong to all of the church, whether people were planning to be baptized or not. It was a community experience for all of us. So that sense of focus on what the incarnation is about is a really profound gift to the church. And I've been grateful over the last years of my life to be able to walk through Advent in a more focused way. And now there's so many resources. There's devotionals, there's online sources, there's an abundance of things to be able to enhance that part of the month of December. We already have in our minds and in our cultural experience a superheated kind of experience of December, where there's office parties and trips to the mall to see Santa. We've got a lot of expectation of how special this season can be. And all of the cultural stuff, it competes in some ways, or it definitely does not enhance kind of what Advent is about. Now, in this month, in the year of our Lord, 2020, we're all experiencing Advent. And many people have noted that we're home and that we're not able to do as much of the cultural stuff. So where does that leave us? And there's been a lot of subtraction, but there's also space in the subtraction for some of those other things that were there long before a Christmas tree ever was.
And you say that would be really digging into the Word and perhaps reading what people who've really thought about this a lot, believers in the past and currently, so that we can train our hearts toward what it is that we're celebrating, which is God becoming human for our sake.
And traditionally, Advent was about, or is about, both Advents, both the incarnation and the coming of Christ, and also building in us an expectation of Christ's return to this world. And traditionally, there's a lot of readings, you know, the traditional church calendar readings that take us into books like Isaiah and Revelation during this season, which are not usually what we think of, in our holly jolly Christmas, but there's a sobriety that comes with those readings that really helps us prepare for what Christmas is about. And that longing, the waiting, and the living in the now and the not yet, which many theologians say that we're living in these times. Advent helps us tap into that. Meanwhile, yes. I can say, as an Advent observer and a person with that background, that it's different this year for me and for all of us. I've got a lifetime of memories that I've accumulated since those first years. And those memories, get-togethers, cookie exchanges, the fun things, gatherings with family, that those aren't going to be a part of what my holiday season is like this year. And I think for many listening, they're having a very different holiday. And so it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be disoriented. It's okay to wait for better times. It's all of that for Advent.
Right, because we are waiting for the second Advent. And that waiting, what we're waiting for is different, but that feeling's the same.
And the grief of the losses and the God, where are you? The disorientation, all of that is really built into what Advent means. If we tap into the longing of a people for salvation and healing and restoration, our feelings fit this season maybe better than the holly jolly does and ever has.
And the way that Advent works, right, is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we're going through these weeks thinking in those terms, what we're anticipating. And for us, it is the second Advent, but our storyline frequently is the first Advent as we think about what the people of God had been waiting for. And then the celebration is Christmas. That's the great jubilation, because that is the answer to prayer, the answer to salvation. And then we wait, of course, for the second Advent. Yeah. Now a lot of us have raised our children or are raising our children with a special way of commemorating this time of year, whether or not we call it Advent, but of service, incorporating service so that our families are making a point of showing our children, or we want to do it on our own, about how we serve others, because that is part of the understanding of Christmas. So I'm going to ask you to put your homeschooler hat on, your educational book author hat on, as well as your mother and grandmother hats, because right now, a lot of the things that we do as families or have done as families are really off the table. We cannot go sing Christmas carols at a nursing home. We're not even allowed in. Probably cooking at the soup kitchen isn't as easy, and we're not going to be bringing our children to do that, even if we're allowed, if we go through all of the steps in order to be appropriately covered for sanitation. So can you suggest some specific COVID-compliant, child-friendly activities for during these final days before Christmas? We don't have much time, but these final days before Christmas, looking for activities that can help us focus on the meaning of Christmas. I'm not asking a lot.
Well, no. And obviously I'm your world-class expert on these things.
Absolutely.
But I do have some ideas.
Great.
I've given this some thought and have had a couple of interesting conversations with people who are struggling with the same thing. First of all, one interesting thing about Advent in the Christian calendar is that we run up to Christmas on December 25th, at least in the Western Church, and that December 25th is the beginning of what the church calendar marks as Christmas. Those 12 days of Christmas that we sing about with princes leaping and geese laying golden eggs or whatever, all of that begins on Christmas and carries through into January. So one thing I'm going to suggest that is a little bit creative is that we are oriented towards doing those kinds of service projects that you mentioned before Christmas. And there's a way to spread out the wealth a little bit. For example, let's say that your family typically goes to carol at a nursing home or visit a nursing home or goes with a group to sing. A lot of churches do that in December. And I've known activity directors of nursing homes that are like, it would be great if we could
spread this out
a little, share the wealth. So let's say you can't go to a nursing home in your area, but what you can do is give the nursing home a call and find out if they've got residents that don't have family, don't have visitors, how many there are for your group or for your family, as many as you can have capacity for, and have your kids create cards and write notes. Not for Christmas. Do it before Christmas, but maybe plan to send them at the beginning of the year or sometime during those 12 days. Mm-hmm. So it can be a prayer for 2021 or hoping for better days ahead in the coming year. Something that is not just Christmas related, but kind of connects to what's ahead after Christmas. Another thought is to do some baking and writing notes to your first responders in your community.
Great.
Bring cookies to the fire, and it doesn't all have to be on Christmas. Firemen will take cookies on December 29th too, and they'll be really happy to have them.
Great.
Or your police, for example. Think about people in your church that are alone, and again, reach out to them. You can do stuff before Christmas, especially if your kids are oriented towards making cards or doing projects before Christmas, but instead plan for them to be sent after Christmas. It's still hard. That the highest month of suicide is in January, after the holidays are over and people are coming to terms with kind of what their losses are, and the days are so dark. Mm-hmm. So being able to be sensitive and ask God to lead you in sensitive ways to be able to reach out. Another thing that families that have some extra resources might want to do is check with Target or Walmart in your town and find out if there's people that have things on layaway that you might be able to use some of that giving that you did to maybe package up gifts or whatever to be able to help out with somebody's layaway tab.
That's very creative.
In addition to Salvation Army, there's people that need help all the while. And one last idea that I really liked, a group of women in my church, they talked to the homeless shelter here in town, found out what they could do for our homeless population, and they have made little go bags that have protein bar, hand sanitizer, soap. They assembled them and wrote a little note. It's a small thing, but it's something that maybe a homeschool group or a Sunday school class could also do. And you don't have to get together to make those bags. You can go to the dollar store masked up and pick up some things, and they will be used.
Brilliant. Thank you. Those are very creative ideas. And having heard those, I think a lot of us will be able to jump off, and think of some other things that are connected to that. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of wisdom, all the many hats that you wear, that wisdom coming from that, and for joining me here on Inside Out.
If I wore all those hats, it would smash my hair down.
We wouldn't want that. We'll have to do one at a time, I guess. Author, speaker, and blogger Michelle Van Loon's been my guest on this Inside Out podcast. You can learn more about her and her books by going to fln.org/insideout, where I'll post a link to her website. I'm Martha Manikas Foster with this Inside Out podcast on family life.